Wind danced through the sleepy forest, brushing against mossy trunks and tickling leaves that had grown still from centuries of silence. Above, the sky was smeared with morning gold, but deep below, in the roots and shadows, something ancient stirred. A creak echoed, faint at first like the whisper of a dream. Then came another, and another. The forest floor quivered gently, as if the earth had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. A rabbit froze mid-hop, its ears twitching. Birds hushed in the canopy. Something was changing. Beneath an old, towering oak, its bark split with time, and its crown thick with whispering leaves, a shimmer of green light, pulsed once, then faded into the soil. The roots twitched. Not in the way they usually reached for water or curled around stones. No, this was different. They moved with intention. Elsewhere in the forest, near a moss-covered hill, a willow leaned forward ever so slightly, its long arms brushing away the mist as if waking from a deep, forgotten sleep. The stream beside it gurgled louder, almost nervously, and the stones it passed over shivered. And in the farthest glade, where sunlight dared only to trickle in drops through thick leaves, a sapling cracked open its trunk, not with pain, but purpose. A heartbeat slow and strong pounded from within the wood. The forest had not spoken in 1,000 years. But now, its silence cracked. Groaning and creaking echoed again, louder this time, like wooden bones shaking off dust and memory. The trees were waking, and soon they would walk. Far beyond the edge of the forest, where children played and people built their homes, no one noticed the soft stirring of the trees. Only one girl did. Her name was Leela, and she had a curious heart and quiet eyes. She lived in a small cottage with her grandmother, just near the forest's edge, where the wind often whispered secrets through the cracks in the windows. Each morning, Lila would tiptoe out while the dew still clung to the grass. She liked to sit beneath an ancient elm, one that bent slightly, like it had been leaning down to listen to the world for a very long time. That morning, as she approached, she noticed something odd. The roots were no longer tangled the way they always were. They had shifted, just a little, as if someone had nudged them in their sleep. The air felt different too, heavy, like the forest was holding something in. She sat anyway, pulling her knees close and watching the branches sway above her. But today, the swaying felt purposeful. Not just wind, a rhythm. A waiting. That night, while stars blinked above and fireflies blinked below, the first great tree took its step. It was slow and careful, more like a long stretch than a stride. Roots uncoiled like giant snakes and planted themselves into new earth. A second tree followed, and a third. The sound was soft but strong, like deep drums thudding under layers of moss and memory. By dawn, a small circle of trees had gathered together in the middle of the forest. No one knew what they were saying, if they were saying anything at all, but their trunks leaned in slightly, and their branches intertwined like hands held in a secret. Lila noticed the difference immediately. The path she always took through the trees had changed. Ferns she once stepped over now lay trampled. Fallen leaves had formed new spirals, like symbols in a forgotten language. She tilted her head and felt something warm hum under her feet. Back in the village, strange things began to happen. A row of fence posts made from old pine began to lean away from the forest. Tools left near tree stumps disappeared, and small plants pushed through cracks in the stone paths overnight. People murmured, then grumbled. They blamed the wind, the rain, even mischievous children. Only Lila's grandmother, old Nana Marin, watched the trees with knowing eyes. Long ago, she had spoken of the old days, when the forest had been awake, when trees had watched and waited. But no one had listened to her then. That evening, Nana Marin lit a candle and called Lila close. She whispered of the pact, an ancient promise between people and trees. Long ago, when humans first learned to build and burn, the trees agreed to stand still so long as they were honored and not forgotten. But people had forgotten. They cut too deeply, too quickly. They stopped listening. Now, the trees had remembered. Lila's heart beat fast. She looked out the window into the dark curve of the forest. The trees weren't angry, not yet, but they were moving, gathering, deciding. Over the next days, Lila watched the forest change. Great trunks tilted slightly toward the village. Footpaths vanished under thick roots. Flowers bloomed out of season, and mushrooms formed perfect circles overnight. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed afraid to speak. One afternoon, Lila followed a deer into the deep woods. She had never gone so far, but something pulled her forward, like the tug of a dream she couldn't shake. The trees moved around her not quickly, not enough to frighten, but they shifted, guiding her feet. In a clearing she'd never seen before stood the oldest tree of all. It towered above the others, its bark nodded like 100 wrinkled faces. Lila felt the weight of its gaze, though it had no eyes. Beneath it, the earth pulsed with slow life. She knelt before it, heart wide open, and placed her palm on its root. It was warm, not like sun-warmed wood, but like breath, like memory. In that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not pictures, but a feeling. A choice. The trees had not walked to frighten. They had walked because they were sad, forgotten, wounded. They missed being part of the world. They missed children's laughter, songs sung in the wind, stories told at their roots. They missed respect. And they had decided to walk not to leave, but to remind. Lila stood slowly. Her legs trembled. She thanked the old tree, though she didn't know if it heard, but the breeze curled gently around her fingers, like a reply. Back in the village, things had worsened. Gardens wouldn't grow. Wells ran dry. The village council met daily, arguing about why the trees seemed closer, thicker, less friendly. Some wanted to chop a path through them. Others spoke of fire. Lila ran home and told her grandmother everything. Nana Marin nodded slowly, then took a bundle of herbs and a carved wooden flute from a chest beneath the bed. It was time, she said, to honor the pact again. Together, they went to the forest's edge. Lila lit a lantern, while her grandmother played a tune. So old, the air itself seemed to remember it. The music drifted into the trees, soft and clear. Leaves rustled in rhythm, roots settled. The forest listened. Over the next 3 nights, Lila and Nana Marin returned. They left gifts at the roots, stones painted with kindness, songs written on ribbons, cups of sweet water, and bread shaped like leaves. Lila told stories aloud beneath the stars, stories about peace, friendship, and listening. And the trees began to slow, not stop, not sleep, but slow, as if the rhythm of their steps softened, as if they were waiting. Then, on the 5th morning, a new tree appeared in the village square. No one had seen it arrive. It stood in the center, tall and straight, its bark smooth and its branches wide like open arms. But this tree was different. Its trunk was carved not by axe, but by nature. The shapes showed children playing, people sharing food, animals curled in roots. A reminder, a gift. The villagers gathered, silent. They looked at the images, then at each other. For the first time in many years, they listened. And far into the forest, the great trees stood still, watching, waiting to see what people would do next. Night fell heavy across the village. Not dark, but dense, thick with silence, as if even the stars were holding their breath. The mysterious tree in the square stood unmoving, its carved trunk glowing faintly in the moonlight. People avoided walking too close, unsure whether it was a message or a warning. Inside their cottage, Lila and Nana Marin sat by the fire. The warmth from the flames didn't reach Lila's fingertips. She kept glancing at the window, where the shapes of trees loomed closer than ever before. Their branches stretched like fingers, casting long shadows on the earth. That night, the trees walked again. They moved slowly, but no longer just in the deep woods. Their roots dragged softly over the hills. Their trunks groaned like old doors. Some stepped into empty fields, others leaned over wells and gardens. One even brushed against the roof of the baker's house, scattering dry leaves down the chimney. The village was surrounded now, circled like the eye of a storm, and the trees stood still, watching. Fear began to spread. People boarded up their windows, spoke in hushed voices, and lit lamps they didn't extinguish. The mayor held a hurried meeting at dawn, shouting over the worried chatter. Some wanted to flee, others wanted to fight. A few remembered old tales but said they were just stories, nothing more. But Leela knew better. She walked back into the woods, alone, clutching the flute her grandmother had given her. The trees let her pass. They parted for her like ripples in a pond. Their trunks twisted slightly in her direction, following her steps, though none moved to block her way. The ancient tree still stood in its hidden clearing, more awake than ever. Its leaves shimmered with morning dew, though no sun had touched them. Lila approached quietly, heart hammering. She knelt once more and placed the flute on the ground. She didn't speak. She just waited. And then, the earth trembled. Not a shake, but a pulse deep and slow, like a drum beneath her feet. Around her, the trees began to close in. Not quickly, but with purpose. Dozens of them, hundreds, silent, towering, heavy with age. They formed a circle, their branches tangling above like a roof of green and shadow. Then, they stopped. Lila stood up. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. She didn't speak in words the trees would know. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped forward, arms open, and offered what she had: her fear, her love, her promise. She bowed deeply to the ancient tree. The forest held its breath. And then something extraordinary happened. A small tree, no taller than Lila herself, stepped forward from the crowd. Its leaves shimmered like silver. It had not been there before. It moved with a grace that didn't match its size. It circled Lila slowly, examining her, curious and cautious. Then, its branches dipped low, like a child offering a gift. Lila reached out. Her fingers brushed the soft green leaves. In that moment, a warmth flowed into her palm and up her arm like liquid sunlight. She saw flashes, not images, but feelings. The birth of the forest, the joy of spring, the loneliness of stillness, the pain of forgotten songs. And something else, a warning. The trees were not here to fight, but they would not be ignored again. The world was out of balance. Humans had taken too much, too fast. The trees had decided to remind them, and if they had to keep walking, they would. Lila took a step back. She understood now. This was not just about trees moving. It was about everything they stood for: patience, listening, respect, and care. The forest was asking for a promise. She bowed again, then turned and ran. Back at the village, the council had made its choice. Fear had spoken louder than hope. They would burn a path through the woods, just wide enough to feel safe again, just enough to keep the trees from reaching their homes. They gathered torches. Lila burst into the square just as the first flame was lit. She threw herself between the people and the woods, shouting without words, arms raised, eyes wide with truth. Behind her, a soft rumble grew. The trees had heard. They were coming, but not to fight. One by one, trees stepped from the shadows into the edge of the village, not angry, but present. Giants among cottages, moving slowly, solemnly. The air grew thick with the scent of leaves, bark, and old rain. The fire-bearers froze. Then, a sound filled the square. Not a voice, not a roar, but music. The flute. Somewhere in the trees, it played. Sweet, soft, familiar. Nana Marin had begun the song again. Lila stood tall, pointing toward the ancient tree line, where dozens of trees had gathered in a semicircle. Some leaned forward, others simply watched. All waited. Slowly, Lila approached the mysterious tree in the center of the square. She knelt beside it and placed both hands on its trunk. The carving on the bark began to glow. The crowd gasped. The images, children, animals, forests moved, not like a painting, but like light flickering through memory. It was a message. It showed humans dancing with trees, not cutting them. It showed families planting seeds, not fences. It showed children telling stories beneath the roots, not running in fear. And the carving changed again to show what would happen next: two paths, one of friendship, one of fire. The villagers dropped their torches. The mayor stepped forward slowly, lowering his head. Others followed. One by one, they placed their hands on the tree's trunk, beside Lila's. The glowing stopped. The forest waited. Then, the smallest tree, the one who had touched Lila, stepped into the village square. It planted itself in the soil beside the old tree, and it stayed. Behind it, the trees began to turn. One by one, the ancient forest turned back toward its heart. Not all left. Some stayed at the edges. But the threat had passed. Not because the trees had surrendered, but because someone had listened. Because someone had remembered. Lila looked up at the glowing bark, at the image of a child and a tree holding hands. And she smiled. Morning came softly, the light draping over rooftops like a blanket of gold. The village had not looked this quiet in years. Not from fear, but from peace. Birds returned to the trees that lined the houses, chirping with cautious joy. The sky stretched wide and blue, as if it too had taken a deep breath. In the center of the square, the mysterious carved tree still stood tall, but beside it now grew the younger tree, its silver-green leaves glowing faintly. People gathered around it with gentle steps. They no longer whispered with worry, but watched with reverence. Children brought tiny garlands made of dandelions and clover. They laid them at the roots, like offerings of apology. The mayor had taken down the signs he once nailed to trees. No more chopping. No more shouting. Instead, he stood near the young tree, helping a boy hammer a wooden bench into the ground, not to take from the tree, but to sit beside it and learn. Lila and Nana Marin were there too. The old woman's eyes crinkled with quiet pride as she watched her granddaughter tell the story of the walking trees to a circle of children. Lila's voice was steady. Her hands danced as she spoke. And when she came to the part where the forest offered a choice, the children leaned in, their eyes wide and shining. They had listened. And that made all the difference. Over the next weeks, the village changed, not in ways people feared, but in ways they had forgotten to hope for. The soil near the forest grew richer. Gardens bloomed with brighter flowers. The river ran clearer, and birds of colors no one remembered seeing returned to the skies. The villagers no longer went into the forest to take. They went to walk, to listen, to learn. A path was made, but not by cutting trees. The forest itself gently curved open a trail, lined with soft moss and golden mushrooms. It led to the ancient clearing, where the great tree still stood in silence, watching over the land with wisdom older than time. Lila returned often. She brought stories and seeds, which she planted in little hollows between the roots. She never expected the trees to speak, but she always felt them listening. Sometimes, the wind curled around her like a hug. Sometimes, a leaf would drift down and land softly on her shoulder, like a wordless thank you. And then one day, something new happened. Near the foot of the ancient tree, a sapling had grown, one Lila had not planted. It was small, barely taller than her knees, but its leaves shimmered the same silver green as the young tree in the village square. She knelt beside it and smiled, placing a smooth stone at its base. It was a gift, a promise. The forest remembered her. Back in the village, changes continued. The school added a new subject, listening to the forest. Children spent mornings learning about roots and rhythms, about how trees talked in their own slow way through wind, scent, and the whisper of branches. They no longer feared the woods, they respected them. The people no longer cut old trees for firewood. Instead, they gathered fallen branches with permission, always leaving a small thank you stone in return. Some even sang when they entered the forest, just soft tunes, to let the trees know they came in peace. One evening, the entire village gathered in the square for a festival, the first walking. That's what they called the night the trees returned. There were lanterns shaped like leaves, music made with wooden flutes and drums, and bread shaped like trunks and mushrooms. In the center of it all stood the young silver tree, now a little taller, its roots curling playfully around the carved trunk beside it. Lila was asked to light the first lantern. As she did, the glow spread through the square like a gentle sunrise, and for a moment, it felt as if the whole village glowed. As the lanterns floated into the night sky, something stirred at the edge of the woods. The trees had gathered again not to walk, but to watch. They stood in a wide, gentle ring, their branches swaying slowly to the rhythm of the music. Not quite dancing, but not still either. And high above, the wind carried the music through the forest, leaf to leaf, branch to branch, root to root. Even the ancient tree in the deep clearing leaned just a little, like a bow. From that night forward, the village was never the same, but not because the trees had changed it. The people had. They learned to see the forest not as a wall, or a threat, or a thing to use, but as a neighbor, a teacher, and a friend. And in return, the trees stood guard around them, not to keep them out, but to keep them safe. Lila grew older, but she never stopped walking the path to the clearing. Sometimes she came alone, sometimes with others. She taught children how to bow gently to a tree and wait before stepping forward. She taught them how to plant seeds with quiet hands. And sometimes, when no one else was around, she would sit with her back against the silver-green sapling and hum the tune her grandmother once played. The forest hummed with her. And though the trees never spoke with words, their message was clear. Kindness is never forgotten, and respect is always returned. So when trees decided to walk, it was not to leave the world, but to remind it how to belong. And the world, with the help of a brave girl and an ancient promise, remembered.